Now, 11:17, so that's good timing. So I sort of feel apologetic, feel being late, so now I'm not.
That's okay. No need to apologize.
So where we were, let's read.
Okay.
We-
I'm not. See, I think I bookmarked it.
You like reading together in this topic, right? So
Yeah, of course.
I think yeah. I like Tolstoy very much. He's a decent man, so a genius for sure. Yeah. Well, we are in War and Peace, second epilogue by Leo Tolstoy. This is chapter 8 now. I'm going to start reading. Okay, so
Okay.
yeah. If history dealt only with the external phenomenon, the establishment of this simple and obvious law would suffice, and we should have finished our argument. But the law of history relates to man. A particle of matter cannot tell us that it does not feel the law of attraction or repulsion, and that law is untrue. But man, who is the subject of history, says plainly, I am free, and am therefore not subject to the law. The presence is a problem of man's free will, though unexpressed, is felt at every step of history. All seriously thinking historians have involuntarily encountered this question. All the contradictions and obscurities of history, and the false paths historical science has followed, are due solely to the lack of a solution for that question. If the will of every man were free, that is, if every man could act as he pleased, all history would be a series of disconnected incidents. If in 1,000 years even one man in a million could act freely, that is, as he chose, it is evident that one single free act of that man's in violation of the laws governing human action would destroy the possibility of the existence of any laws for the whole of humanity. If there be a single law governing the actions of man, free will cannot exist, for the man's will is subject to that law. In this contradiction lies the problem of free will, which from most ancient times has occupied the best human minds, and from most ancient times has been presented in its whole tremendous significance. Man, I will have a hard time to pronounce that word. You see it, please. Significance. Okay. The problem is that regarding man as a subject for observation from whatever point of view, the theological, historical, ethical, or philosophic, we found the general law of necessity to which he, like all that exists, is a subject. But regarding him from within ourselves, as we are conscious of, we feel ourselves to be free. The consciousness is a source of self-cognition quite apart from and independent of reason. That's crazy. I just began to study something about the human consciousness recently. So, through his reason, man observes himself that only through consciousness does he know himself. That's a good point. Apart from consciousness itself, no observation or application of reason is conceivable. To understand, observe, and draw conclusions. Let's read this part again slowly. Apart from consciousness itself, no observation or application of reason is conceivable. I am, therefore, something. Am I? Yeah. I think what?
I think, therefore I am.
Therefore, there we go. Interesting. Yeah. Oh, I am, therefore I think.
Yeah, that is actually how he's reading it.
Yeah. I am, therefore I think.
More specifically, he's saying, I know I am, therefore I can reason.
Yes. Basically. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Very sophisticated but important topic. Yeah. Mm-hmm. To understand, observe, and draw conclusions. Man must first of all be conscious of himself as a living. Also, you read this before, so
Yeah.
okay, man, okay, so okay, you heard me. A man is only conscious of himself as a living being by the fact that he wills. That is, conscious of his violation. That is, he's a botanist. A botanist, something called a botanist. He's about to do something. He intends to do something. So, intentiveness, whatever is the intention.
Conscious of the ability, or conscious of his will, basically.
Yes, his will. But his will, which forms essence of life, may recognize it can but recognize as a free. If observing himself, man sees that his will is always directed by one and the same law. Whether it observes the necessity of taking food, using the brain, or anything else, he can't recognize this never varying direction of his will, otherwise than as a limitation of it. Were it not free, could not be limited. A man's will seems to him to be limited just because he is not conscious of it except as a free. I say I'm not free, but I have lifted my hand to let it fall. Everyone understands that this illogical reply is an irrefutable demonstration of freedom. That reply is an expression of a consciousness that is not subject to reason. If the consciousness of free will, of freedom, were not a separate, independent source of self-consciousness, it would be subject to reasoning and to experience. But in fact, such subjection does not exist. It is inconceivable. A series of experiments and arguments prove to every man that he, as an object of observation, is subject to certain laws, and man subject to them and submits to them and never resists the law of gravity or impenetrability once he had become acquainted with them. But the same series of experiments and arguments prove to him that the complete freedom of which he is conscious himself is impossible, but that his every action depends on his organization, his character, and the motives acting upon him. A man never submits to the deductions of these experiments and arguments. Having learned from experiment and argument that a stone falls downwards, a man indubitably, what that word means, no idea.
I guess maybe without refute or without...
Impossible to doubt, okay,
Yeah.
indubitably. Believes and this and always believes this and always expects the law that he has learned to be fulfilled. But learning just as certainly that his will is subject to laws, he does not and cannot believe this. Okay. So he's a bird in a cage. However, often experience and reasoning may show the man that under the same conditions with the same character he will do the same thing as before. Yet when under the same conditions with the same character he approaches for the 1,000th time the action that always ends in the same way, he feels as certainly convinced that it before experience that he can act as he pleases. What's it called? For the same thing cannot change what I call the English expression. Anyway.
You mean the I think it's French, the déjà vu you're talking about?
Not really. He's just doing the same thing repeatedly, can't help but doing the same thing. One called it the old dog cannot learn new tricks, something like that, so yeah, or something of that nature. So he can't help doing the same thing, so.
Yeah.
Hey, did you have a haircut yourself?
I did.
Oh,
I did.
no, cut too short, so it's not obvious like Elijah.
Yeah.
I see the difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Elijah totally changed the hairstyle from curly to straight, man. So, yeah. Every man, savage or sage, however incontestable the reason and experience may prove to him that it's impossible to imagine two different courses of action in precisely the same conditions, feels that without this irrational conception which constitutes the essence of freedom, he cannot imagine life. He feels that however impossible it may be, it is so. For without this conception of freedom, not only would he be unable to understand life, but he would be unable to live for a single moment. You really okay? So certain people live like animals. Sorry, so I was talking. So he would not live because all man's efforts, all his impulses to life. Don't say that to a drug user or a drunk man. Right? Sorry. Sorry, I'm at the too extreme there. Sorry. He would not live because all man's efforts, all his impulses to life, only efforts to increase freedom, wealth and poverty, fame's obscurity, power and subordination, strength and weakness, health and disease, culture and ignorance, work and leisure, repletion and hunger, virtue and vice are only greater or lesser degrees of freedom. A man having no freedom cannot be considered except as deprived of life. Deprived, am I right? Deprived or deprived? Okay. If the conception of a freedom appear to reason to be a senseless contradiction, like the possibility of performing two actions at one at the same instant time, don't talk about the quantum physics. So, all of effect without a cause. I'm sorry, I'm gonna spicy out our reading. Okay, so that's a joke. All of a effect without a cause. His topic is pretty boring. Sorry, the way he's doing it. Interesting topic, but the talking too lengthy. So, on an effect without the cause, that only proves that the consciousness is not subject to reason. Is not subject to reason. Can you believe that? Consciousness is not subject to reason. That's discovered by Tolstoy long time ago, but man don't believe it, right? Yeah. Some still believe consciousness is a product of brain mechanics. Yeah. Can you believe that? It doesn't outside your brain. Ridiculous. Sorry. To never get a out of body experience. That's all. Oh, that's not true. They still think it's in the brain, I guess, so hallucination. Okay. Anyway, can't give out the term. They've never been called out. Come back, speak a different language like I did. Sorry. Okay. This unshakable, irrefutable consciousness of freedom, uncontrolled by experiment or argument, recognized by all thinkers, felt by everyone without exception. This is a consciousness without which no conception man is possible, constitutes the other side of the question. Man is a creation of all powerful, all good, and all seeing God. What is sin? The conception of which arises from the consciousness of man's freedom. That is a question for theology. The actions of man subject to general immutable laws expressed in statistics. Can you believe that? Wow. Tolstoy is a very beautiful thinker, man. Seriously. There you go. In that time, we already understand the theory called the possibility, right? So probability. I'm sorry. Yeah. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? Wow. Remember I told you free will like shooting a darts, shooting the target. Mm-hmm. What is man's responsibility to society? The conception which results from the conception of freedom. Man, I wish I could read this article when I was young, man. Sorry. The conception which results from the concept of freedom. That is a question for jurisprudence. Can you believe that? That's inspired thinking there. So, jurisprudence. Have you ever think about that concept? It's not in Christian mind most of the time. They all think it's legalism, you know. The truth, man, jurisprudence is a base or the real substance, if you will. English word, they say. For the all the foundational thing about for peace, righteousness, and real joy, right? Peace, you know. Love your neighbor means more than have peace with your neighbor, right? Have affection with your neighbor. Righteousness, you don't do wrong to others, and right? You do good to one another. Making sense here? Righteousness. There required a jurisprudence behind it. And that's not necessarily through legalistic or externally enforced, but internally inspired and agreed upon. You see my point, you know? So, therefore, we have, in human history, we have two ways, even in a cultural, governmental level, to try to produce a good citizen, if you will. You know, a good member society, basically, a good member family. Should it be from internally, agreed upon, inspired, am I? Or should it impose upon you? You know, one is legalistic. That's essence, means being slave to the law in the Bible. The other is born again in the Spirit, am I? Inspired to be like Christ, am I? So, by the Holy Spirit, am I? So, when Paul is speaking, it's not rules of eating, doing this. Don't. It's not external imposed upon you. It's by the Holy Spirit enlightening you. Source of the kingdom of God is a joy, peace, righteousness in the power of the Holy Spirit, right? So talking about the inner man begin to fundamentally change. So it is human society. You can look at Greek or most Western philosophies and theories how to govern yourself properly. It was always an engineer, we call it social engineering, right? So engineering try to work on this machinery, on mechanics, try to see, okay, man cannot really change themselves very well. Let's just give up on that. So let's just see if we can control, that evil overflow, am I, overboard, or produce punishment if they do terribly wrong, am I? So let's never thinking there will be a society or the people that truly have one heart, one mind, one agreement, am I? So, you know, the American foundation culture ended up into party in information understanding. By nature, is actually don't seek a true agreement to become one people. Even he said we as a people want to be a people, a man people unity, but by nature design cannot be a one people. Why? It encourage bigotry, it encourage partisanship, you know, encourage monitor one another. We call the balance of power, but it really is distrust, based on distrust, right? So rather than trust, am I listen to you? You know, so balance power. Why you balance power? You know, if you really trust one another, you enhance one another. You let us do the thing need to be done, right? So you help one another. You don't need to balance power unless there is a evil and abuse power, which is prevalent in the society that carried those days, you know. So especially monarchy's power, corrupted monarchy or aristocratic power. So that being said, I think all those Tolstoy pretty much was familiar with. Am I thinking about those things? So there is a question for jurisprudence. What is jurisprudence? You know, so even if a nation, this nation have a kind of jurisprudence, which should be the essence of the Supreme Court, the judges qualified, right? So you have jurisprudence. Based on what? You know, informed on the set of laws, right? Set of, we call the Constitution, whatever, as the supreme law, right? So for that setting. But jurisprudence was a historical thing as well. It's more than this American law. Carried common law tradition that is long time ago, right? But it's always, this jurisprudence is always, first, foremost, is said, well, there's something wrong. Let's do something about it, right? So rather than real law. Said there's something good. Let's educate that. Let's nurture that. Let's encourage that. Right? So it's two different ways of carry out jurisprudence as well. So am I making sense to you? So the one is said don't do wrong, right? The other said here's a good thing. Let's all do it. Learn to do it better, right? So interesting law, legal orientation, So I want you to read on here. So
okay. Man's actions proceed from his innate character and the motives acting upon him. What is conscience and the perception of right and wrong in actions that follows from the consciousness of freedom? That is a question for ethics. Man, in connection with the general life of humanity, appears subject to laws which determine that life. But the same man, apart from that connection, appears to be free. How should the past life of nations and of humanity be regarded? As a result of the free, or as the result of the constrained activity of man? That is a question for history.
Let's read the two paragraphs again. So
man's actions proceed from his innate character and the motives acting upon him. What is conscience and the perception of right and wrong in actions that follows from the consciousness of man, of freedom, sorry.
Okay.
That is a question for ethics.
Ethics. So that's domain of ethics, right? So what is right, wrong, character, motive. Go ahead.
And that actually, maybe not as much in Tolstoy's time, but that later developed probably 50 years later into the really influential branch of psychology.
Psychology.
As it concerns like how influences in a man's life cause him to make decisions in a certain way and see those patterns in those decisions too.
Give me a good example.
Well, I mean, like later on you had people that focused primarily on the individual, like say Sigmund Freud.
Oh.
Like what I think he actually, I don't know too much about him, but
true.
He may have developed insights as to what free will is as it concerns the way human choices are developed, depending on their environment and inner character that maybe is born innately within them or is formed by their circumstances.
Yeah, he denied free will in that sense. He thinks it's a product of his impulses or sort of sexual whatever desires.
Exactly.
So, go ahead. So unconsciousness part is dominating the consciousness part, basically. So that's subconscious, that's where he pulled out. So anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry, no one interrupt you. So,
no, it's okay.
You're true.
It's just, and then also you have like people who try to develop models and patterns for what they observed in societies, which
human
is like sociology.
Modeling.
Which is still kind of a psychological approach to
it. It's a pseudoscience for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry to use that word, but it's pseudoscience, right? So
it's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, for example, the things apply to American doesn't apply to Indian, right? Apply to who knows? People of Solomon Island. So in different culture setting, you kind of see all the same. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Man, in connection with the general life of humanity, appears subject to laws which determine that life. But the same man, apart from that connection, appears to be free. How should the past life of nations and of humanity be regarded? As a result of the free, or as the result of the constrained activity of man? That's
very interesting observation, right? So it's self-contradictory, So
that's what he was trying to expound on a little bit earlier. I think he's going to develop.
Oh, great! Yeah.
I think he has two parts almost. Like the first several chapters are perspectives of history. Following chapters are
answer to those questions.
Perspective of consciousness, free will, and inevitability, and then he kind of brings them together.
That's very nice. Yeah. Go ahead.
Only in our self-confident day of the popularization of knowledge, thanks to that most powerful engine of ignorance, the diffusion of printed matter, has the question of freedom of will been put on a level on which the question itself cannot exist.
It's pretty insightful.
In our time, the majority of so-called advanced people, that is, the crowd of ignoramuses, have taken the work of the naturalists who deal with one side of the question for a solution of the whole problem.
Wow.
They say and write and print that the soul and freedom do not exist. For the life of man is expressed by muscular movements, and muscular movements are conditioned by the activity of the nerves. The soul and free will do not exist because at an unknown period of time we sprang from the apes.
Wow.
They say this, not at all suspecting that thousands of years ago, that same law of necessity, which with such ardor they are now trying to prove by physiology and comparative zoology, was not merely acknowledged by all the religions and all the thinkers, but has never been denied. They do not see that the role of the natural sciences in this matter is merely to serve as an instrument for the illumination of one side of it.
Mm.
For the fact that, from the point of view
He
of
was talking
observation,
Darwinism, right? So, yeah.
For the fact that from the point of view of observation, reason and the will are merely secretions of the brain, and that man, following the general law, may have developed from lower animals at some unknown period of time, only explains, from a fresh side, the truth admitted thousands of years ago by all the religious and philosophic theories, that from the point of view of reason, man is subject to the law of necessity. But it does not advance by a hair's breadth the solution of the question, which has another opposite side, based on the consciousness of freedom. If men descended from the apes at an unknown period of time, that is as comprehensible as that they were made from a handful of earth at a certain period of time. In the first case, the unknown quantity is the time. In the second case, it is the origin. And the question of how man's consciousness of freedom is to be reconciled with the law of necessity to which he is subject cannot be solved by comparative physiology and zoology, for in a frog, a rabbit, or an ape, we can observe only the muscular nervous activity. But in a man, we observe consciousness as well as the muscular and nervous activity.
You serious? He's definitely once beyond his time, right? He's thinking. Can you believe that?
It's not even extremely complex either. He's thinking very reasonably, very simply, too.
Yeah, very simple.
Very concise.
Yeah. You know, it's called the feudal science, like Darwinism. I'm not challenging some are good of it. It totally sweet how society and human behavior being observed, you know, so it's wanky. Then you have this on the other side, another feudal science, Freudism, whatever.
Yeah.
Am I? Two of them has no sound base really, and serious understanding of human behaviors,
right.
Human psyche, whatever word, or consciousness. Either don't even care.
Yeah.
And but they crafted their own theories, am I? And sweep the whole human world, academic world, I believe that, intellectual world, because the human mind cannot help but self-deceive themselves, think they're smarter. They can challenge ancient wisdom like the Bible, am I right? Like a certain deep thinkers, like already give answer to all those questions actually. So, do you understand my point? So Freud is saying, I mean, it was clear answer in the Bible. We just don't like to use the vocabulary. He called God called demonic, so kind of wisdom. So forces beyond ourselves. Freud never think there are forces beyond yourself. Darwin never think there is a supernatural realm, right? Or existing God. So there's a fundamentally not
the
evil.
interesting thing about Darwin is actually he did admit a creator.
A creator, but a creator is a mechanic, like a clockwork, right? So
interesting, yeah.
Go ahead.
The naturalists and their followers, it's basically Darwin and those thinkers, thinking they can solve this question, are like plasters set to plaster one side of the walls of a church, who, availing themselves in the absence of the chief superintendent of the work, should in an access of zeal plaster over the windows, icons, woodwork, and still unbuttressed walls.
We're a good
and
example.
Should be delighted that from their point of view, the plasters, everything is now so smooth and regular.
Seriously, huh?
It's interesting.
We're a good picture. Okay, you want to read on or you want to stop? Sure. Yeah, I think you should read on. So.
Oh, Naomi just asked what we wanted from hibachi.
Oh, I want the hibachi Man, I don't know what they have. What are you gonna have?
Uh, I'm gonna have the bento lunch with chicken teriyaki and 4 pieces of California and a spring roll.
Okay, you give me the shrimp for bento lunch.
Shrimp bento lunch?
Yeah, I think they have that one, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. If not beef, so.
I think the bento lunch comes with 2 sides too.
Okay, I want the California. And I think they give us soup, am I? No?
I didn't see it last time, but I don't know.
What else they have? Sides.
There's a little salad and then also spring roll.
I have a. I want the salad then, so. Sorry for that. Yeah.
No, we're good.
It's all into recordings, and no, okay.
Oh.
Yeah. People will know what wonderful lunch we're partaking these days. Hibachi, bento lunch. Hey, I'm gonna relax my legs a little bit. So. Well, your book is all falling apart. Look at that.
Yeah, that's an old book.
Yeah. That's all the characters there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you helps you keep track of what's
Yeah.
all the characters.
I think we still have at least 20 minutes before they arrive, right? So.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So I'm gonna read from here. I just don't understand the English word well. Sorry. If you read it, I'll listen to it. I don't understand what you're talking about anymore. Sorry. Yeah. The English is very strange. I mean, the thought pattern very strange.
Yeah.
Okay, chapter 9, right? Okay. For the solution of the question of free will, or inevitably history, has this advantage over other branches of knowledge in which the question is dealt with, that for history that this question does not refer to the essence of man's free will, but its manifestation in the past and under certain conditions. In regard to this question, history stands to the other sciences as experimental science stands to abstract science. The subject of history is not man's will itself, but our presentation of it. That's a very good point. And so for history, the insoluble mystery presented by the incompatibility of free will, the inevitability does not exist. It does for theology, ethics, and philosophy. History serves a presentation of man's life in which the union of these two contradictions has already taken place. In actual life, its historical events, its human actions were clearly and definitely understood without any sense of contradiction. Also, each event presents itself as partly free and partly compulsory. To solve the question of how freedom and necessity are combined, and what constitutes in essence these two conceptions, the philosophy of history can and should follow a path contrary to that taken by other sciences, instead of first defining the conceptions of freedom and inevitability in themselves, and then raging the phenomena of life under those definitions. History should deduce a definition of the conception of freedom and inevitability themselves from the immense quantity of phenomena of which it is cognizant and that always appear dependent on these two elements. Whatever presentation of the activity of many men or of an individual we may consider, we always regard it as a result partly of man's free will and partly the law of inevitability. Whether we speak of the migration of the peoples, of the incursions of the barbarians, or of the decrees of Napoleon III, all of someone's action and our goal in choosing one direction out of several for his work, we are unconscious of any contradiction. The degree of freedom and inevitability governing the actions of these people is clearly defined for us. Our conception's degree of freedom often varies according to differences in the point of view from which regards the event. But every human action appears to us as a certain combination of free will, freedom, and inevitability. In every action we examine, we see a certain measure of freedom, a certain measure of inevitability, and always the more freedom we see in any action, the less inevitability do we perceive, and the more inevitability, the less freedom. The proportion of freedom to inevitability decreases and increases according to the point of view from which the action is regarded, and the relation is always one of inverse proportion. A sinking man who clutches another and drowns him, or the hungry mother exhausted by feeding her baby, who steals some food, or a man trained to discipline who on duty, at the word of command, kills a defenseless man, seems less guilty, that is, less free and more subject to the law of necessity, to one who knows the circumstances in which these people were placed, and more free to one who does not know that the man was himself drowning, and that the mother was hungry, and the soldier was in the rank, and so on. Similarly, a man who committed a murder 20 years ago, and since lived peaceably and harmlessly in society, seems less guilty. His action more due to the law of inevitability to some who consider his action after 20 years have eclipsed than to the one who examined it the day after it was committed. And in the same way, every action of an insane, intoxicated, or highly excited man appear less free and more inevitable to one who knows the mental condition of him who commits the action, and seems more and less inevitable to who does not know it. That is interesting. In criminal law, this actually applies, So, in all these cases, the conception of freedom is increased or diminished, and the conception of compulsion is correspondingly decreased or increased according to the point of view from which the action is regarded. So then the greater the conception of necessity, the smaller the conception of freedom, and vice versa. Vice versa, I mean, vice versa? Vice versa. Okay. That is a Latin word or Greek word or French? Vice versa.
Seems Latin to me.
Latin, okay. Religion, the common sense of mankind, the science of jurisprudence, and the history itself understand alike this relation between necessity and freedom. All cases without exception in which our conception of freedom, necessity is increased and diminished depend on three considerations. One, the relation to the external world of man who commits the deed. Two, his relation to time. Three, his relation to the causes leading to the action. Tolstoy was acting as a judge for a while, right? Did he? He serves as the judiciary
I think for his position.
Yeah, he had to make judgment, I think. Dealing with criminal.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
Yeah.
Settling like local disputes or something.
Yeah, a
part of some board, I think.
Yeah, the last novel he had, the character reflected part of his life, I think. Nearly Tolstoy. The novel is called Resurrection. Has the main character acting as judge in the beginning. So yeah.
Yeah, I have that book actually.
You do? Okay, so yeah. There's a lot of details about the prison, judicial processes, whatever. So legal processes. So anyway, so let's go on. The first consideration is a clearness of our perception of the man's relation to the external world, and the greater or lesser clearness of our understanding the definite position occupied by the man in relation to everything coexisting with him. This is what makes it evident that a drowning man is less free and more subject to necessity than one standing on dry ground. And that makes the actions of a man closely connected with others in a thickly populated district, or of one bound by family, official, or business duties, seem certainly less free and more subject to necessity than those of a man living in solitude and seclusion. If we consider man alone, apart from his relation to everything around him, every action of his seems to us free. But if we see his relation to anything around him, if we see his connection with anything, whatever, with a man who speaks to him, a book he reads, the work on which he is engaged, even with his ear he breathes, or the light that falls on things about him. Okay. That's true. We see that each of these circumstances has influence on him that controls at least one side of his activity, and the more we perceive these influences, the more our conceptions of his freedom diminishes, and the more our conception of the necessity that weighs on him increases. Eventually you will sympathize with criminals. Sorry.
Yeah.
The second consideration is more or less evident time relation of the man to the world, and the clearness of our perceptions of the place a man's action occupies in time. That is the ground in which makes the fall of the first man, resulting in the production of the human race, appear evidently less free than a man's entry into marriage today. It's the reason why the life active people who lived centuries ago and are connected with me in time cannot seem to me as free as the life of a contemporary, the consequences of which are still unknown to me. The degree of our conception of freedom or inevitability depends in this respect on the greater or lesser lapse of time between the performance of action and our judgment of it. If I examine the act I performed moments ago, in approximately the same circumstances as those I am in now, my action appeared to me undoubtedly free. But if I examine the act performed a month ago, then being in different circumstances, I cannot help recognizing that if that act had not been committed, much that resulted from it, good, agreeable, and even essential, would not have taken place. But if I reflect on an action still more remote, 10 years ago or more, then the consequences of my action are still plainer to me, and I find it hard to imagine what would have happened had that action not been performed. Or what is the same thing, the farther I go forward in my judgment, the more doubtful becomes my belief in the freedom of my action. In history, we found there were similar progressive conviction concerning the part played by free will in the general affairs of humanity. A contemporary event seemed to us to be inevitably the doing of all the known participants, but with a more remote event we already see its inevitable results, which will prevent our considering anything else possible. And the further we go back and examine events, the less arbitrary do they appear. That's a very interesting observation, right? So, personal history. The ultra-brutal war appeared to us undoubtedly, I can read it faster, okay? Undoubtedly the result of the craft conduct of Bismarck and so on. And the Polanic War still seemed to us already questionably to be the outcome of the hero's will. But in the Crusade already see an event occupy its definite place in history, without which we cannot imagine the modern history of Europe, though to the chroniclers of the Crusades, that event appear as merely due to the will of a certain people. In regard to the migration of the people, it does not enter anyone's head today to suppose that the renovation of the European world depended on Antilla's caprice. What is that word? Caprice. The further back in history the object of our observations lies, the more doubtful does the free will of those concerned in the event becomes the more manifest the law of inevitability. The third consideration is the degree to which we apprehend the endless chain of causation inevitably demanded by reason, in which each phenomenon comprehended and therefore man's every action must have its definite place as a result of what has gone before and the cause what will follow. The better we are acquainted with the physiological, psychological, and historical laws deduced by the observations and by which man is controlled, the more correctly we perceive the psychological, psychological,
Physiology.
what? Go ahead. Physiological. Okay, physiological, psychological. Okay, my world. All those have laws. Okay. Physiological, psychological, historical causes of the action. Okay. What are they? I don't know. The simpler the action we are observing and the less complex the character, mind, and mind in question, the more subject to the inevitability and the less free do our actions as those of others appear. When we do not at all understand the cause of action, whether a crime, a good action, or even one that is simply non normal, we non-moral, we ascribe a great amount of freedom to it. In the case of a crime, we most urgently demand the punishment for such an act. In the case of a virtuous act, we rate the merit most highly. In an indifferent case, we recognize it is in more individuality, originality, and independence. But if even one of the innumerable causes of the act is known to us, recognize that certain elements necessitated are less insistent on punishment for the crime, or for the acknowledgement of the merit of the virtuous act, or the freedom of the apparent original action. That's interesting. A theme actually play out in Resurrection. So Maria, I think that's the heroine in it, killed a person, they say. So then she be the subject of a many wrong deed to her. So and the Nidolov is a me character, the hero. Well, I can't call it hero in this case. And then take pity on her, so follow her to Siberia. So it's an interesting story. Yeah. So the way to look at a criminal act, how it committed, who is responsible for it, was upset, from normal perception. So anyway, so here Tolstoy's theory, in the sense of observation, whatever, is actually become the backbone for the storyline in that story. Yeah, interesting, huh?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that a criminal was reared among malefactors. Margaret's fault in our eyes, the self-sacrifice of father, mother, or self-sacrifice with the possibility for reward, is more comprehensible than a gratuitous self-sacrifice, and therefore seems less deserving of sympathy and less the result of free will. The founder of a sect or party or an inventor impresses us less than we know how and by what the way was prepared for his activity. If we have a large range of examples, if our observation is constantly directed seeking the correlation of cause-effect in people's actions, their actions appear to us more under compulsion and less free, the more correctly we connect the effects with the causes. If we examine simple actions that had a vast number of such actions under observation, our conception of their inevitability would be still greater. The dishonest conduct of a son of a dishonest father, the misconduct of a woman who had fallen into bad company, a drunkard's relapse into drunkenness, and so on, actions that seem to us less free, the better we understand their cause. If the man whose action we're considering is on a very low stage of mental development, like a child, a madman, or simpleton, then knowing the cause act and the simplicity act character and intelligence in question, we see so large element necessity and so little free will, that as soon as we know the cause prompting the action, we can foretell the result. On these three considerations alone is based the conception of irresponsibility for crimes, that is extenuating circumstances mediated by all legislative codes. The responsibility appear greater or less according to our greater or lesser knowledge of the circumstances in which the man the place was actually being judged according to the greater or less interval of time between the commission, the action, and its investigation, and according to the greater or less understanding of the causes that it led to the action. Wow, that's very interesting. Good topic.